Lwandile, thanks. And in efforts to curb wildlife crime and improve conservancy protection, the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment has signed a cooperation agreement with the private game reserves in the western boundary of the Kruger National Park. So the agreement will see government and the private entities work together on tackling wildlife poaching, especially rhinos, protecting biodiversity in that region, as well as improving the local economy through tourism. To discuss this now, we're joined live by the Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, Barbara Creecy. Minister, a very good morning to you. Thanks indeed for your time. So who are these stakeholders that are party to this cooperation, and what does it entail?
Good morning and greetings to all your listeners. Well, for many years, I think in some cases 50, 70 years, the Kruger National Park has had an agreement with private nature reserves on the western boundary. And in fact, in many of these reserves, we have dropped the fences between these facilities and the Kruger National Park. Now, you would understand that we have serious problems with regard to wildlife poaching, in particular, the highly syndicated rhino poaching that takes place in the Kruger, and obviously these nature reserves are also affected. We recently visited the area and met with all the private reserve owners, and we agreed to increase cooperation around rhino poaching and to form a committee that will deal with safety. We've also agreed that it's very important to look at how we work together with other land that is available on the western boundary of Kruger. In many cases, this land is under the control of traditional authorities, and how we help residents on this land to become part of the private nature reserve network. We also talked about administrative challenges and red tape that make conservation difficult in the area, and we agreed to set up a subcommittee that would deal with those issues as well.
Yeah. Minister, just correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're seeing a significant increase again in wildlife crime, rhino poaching, since the start of the pandemic, if I'm correct. I mean, how will this agreement tackle that problem?
Well, I think that what we have done is we've set up something called the Fusion Center. And what the center does is it coordinates all information that we are getting from all of our parks, private nature reserves, private landowners, as well as from our own department. And obviously, if you are tackling syndicated crime, information and intelligence is very important. The Fusion Center allows us to process this information. You might have seen in recent times, we have had some quite significant arrests. Yeah. And these arrests are not just of the foot soldiers who are involved in the poaching, but they are much higher up the food chain. We've had arrests of couriers at OR Tambo International Airport. We've also had arrests of other actors in the poaching syndicate value chain. And this is because we are now starting to use instruments such as looking at financial transactions and so on, all of which are the traditional way in which you deal with syndicated crime.
What other strategies, Minister, are there that will form part of this agreement to improve biodiversity protection, to ensure that the immediate environment is protected and conserved in a manner where human activity isn't posing a threat to nature?
Well, I think that's a really important issue that you're raising. And, I think many of us are of the opinion that unless communities that live on the outskirts of our protected areas benefit economically from the existence of these areas, you will always have a situation in instances of high unemployment where there are many willing participants in syndicated crime. And I think this is why this task team that's going to look at economic ecosystems on the within the protected nature reserves, but also looking at the protected areas expansion strategy. So traditionally, of course, the private reserves create jobs. We want to see a situation where their supply chains are procuring goods and services from local suppliers. This is another way in which local areas can benefit. But as I said, we also want to set up partnerships so that we can bring more areas, particularly areas that are under the control of traditional authorities, into the protected areas network, so that those authorities and the people that they are responsible for can benefit from wildlife tourism and from the economic ecosystem that exists around conservation and biodiversity.
And how do we see the local economy improving, through this cooperation agreement?
Look, what was shared with me, and I found it very interesting, is that these private protected areas contribute 17,000 direct jobs. Now, if you are also looking at strategies to open up the supply chain of these nature reserves, where there's a big visitor population that is going into those areas, you're obviously looking at how you can involve local suppliers in food, hospitality services, and so on. You're obviously then looking at how you can have an upstream and downstream multiplier effect in terms of job creation. Yeah. But as I say, we are also very interested in bringing more land into compatible land use with the protected areas. And what this obviously means is you open up a possibility for tourism. But we have recently at cabinet level adopted the game meat strategy, and we believe that if there are extensive areas on the outskirts of our national parks that have compatible land use, there are also opportunities for economic offtake from game meat and other such activities.
Minister, thank you very much indeed for your time. We appreciate you speaking to us on this particular issue. Barbara Creecy is the Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment here in South Africa. Thanks indeed for your time. We do appreciate it. Let's move on to other news now. The